The courtroom had that familiar smell, polished wood, old paper, and burnt coffee that had been sitting too long. I'd spent most of my adult life inside places like this, though never standing where I was now. Not as an observer, not as an authority, but as someone everyone else assumed was powerless. I kept my head lowered as the bailiff called the room to order. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. One wrong move, and everything could collapse. Across the aisle sat the man I'd come to protect, a frail veteran with tired eyes and hands that shook worse than mine. He clutched a folder of documents like they were the last proof that his life had ever mattered. 3 generations had lived in his home. Now a developer wanted it gone. The judge entered. "All rise." I stood slowly, forcing myself not to look up too quickly. When she spoke, her voice was sharp, efficient, trained to move cases, not hear people. Case number, address, names read like inventory. The veteran tried to speak. "Your Honor, Sit down," the judge interrupted without looking at him. "This court is not here for emotional speeches." Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. "I witnessed an assault this morning," I said clearly. "That man was threatened outside his home." The courtroom went quiet. The judge finally looked up. Her eyes passed over me like I wasn't even human. "Ma'am," she said, irritation dripping from every syllable, "this is not your case." "Sit down." I'm here as a witness," I continued. "And what's happening to this man is unlawful." Her jaw tightened. "You are disrupting this court." "With respect," I replied, "justice doesn't work if witnesses are silenced." The temperature in the room dropped. The judge leaned forward. "Bailiff!" I felt the shift instantly. The room had turned on me. "Remove her." Gasps rippled through the benches. "For what?" I asked. The judge's voice was cold. "Contempt of court. 24 hours." That was the sentence. As the bailiff took my arm, I finally lifted my head and looked directly at her face. She didn't recognize me, not her posture, not her eyes, not her voice. She didn't realize she had just ordered her own mother to jail. And she had no idea that within the hour, everything she had built, every secret, every lie was about to collapse. But what happened next wasn't anger or revenge. It was a phone call that would change her life and mine forever. The holding area beneath the courthouse was colder than the courtroom above, not just in temperature, but in spirit. Concrete walls absorbed sound. Fluorescent lights buzzed like tired insects. This was where people waited to be forgotten. The door clanged shut behind me. For the first time that day, I exhaled. 2 women were already inside the cell. One sat rigid on the metal bench, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to disappear. The other leaned against the wall with the hollow calm of someone who'd learned not to expect fairness. "What do you do?" the older one asked without looking up. "Told the truth," I said. She laughed once, dry, bitter. "Yeah, that'll do it in that courtroom." The younger woman looked up at me then. Her eyes were swollen, red from crying. She couldn't have been more than 20. "You had her too?" she asked quietly. I nodded. She swallowed. "She gave me 60 days. I missed court because my mom died." The words hit harder than any insult from the bench upstairs. I sat beside her. "What's your name?" "Lena." The older woman finally turned toward me. "I'm Marisol. 45 days for unpaid parking tickets I couldn't afford after losing my job." She shrugged. "Lost my apartment while I was in here last time." Last time. That word stayed with me. Lena opened the folder clutched in her lap. Papers spilled out, foreclosure notices, receipts, court orders. One document caught my eye immediately. A property seizure signed by the same judge who just sentenced me. "This says your taxes were paid," I said carefully. "They were," Lena whispered. "But the city said the records couldn't be verified." 3 weeks later, our house was sold. "Who bought it?" She hesitated. Then, "A development company, same one buying half the block." The pattern was there, clean, precise, cruel. Upstairs, my daughter believed she controlled everything. Files, people, outcomes. Down here, the consequences lived and breathed. A guard passed by the bars, clipboard in hand. He slowed when he saw me. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes. "How many people come through here from her courtroom?" He hesitated, just a second too long. "Too many," he said. When his footsteps faded, Lena looked at me with fragile hope. You talk like you know the system. Like you might actually be able to help. I chose my words carefully. Someone is listening, I said, and what's happening here won't stay hidden much longer. She nodded, though she didn't fully believe me. I wouldn't have either. A clock ticked loudly on the wall. Somewhere above us, paperwork was being filed. Phone calls were being made. And in less than an hour, the judge who thought she'd erased me from memory would learn exactly who she had locked behind these bars. But when the guard returned, it wasn't to release me. It was to escort me somewhere no one in contempt was ever supposed to go, straight to the judge's private chambers. No one in contempt gets summoned to a judge's chambers. Everyone in that holding cell knew it. So when the guard stopped outside our bars and read my name, the room went silent. Winters, he said, checking his clipboard. You're coming with me. Lena's fingers tightened around her folder. That's not normal, she whispered. It never is, Marisol muttered. The guard unlocked the door. His voice was low, almost apologetic. Judge wants to see you, now. As I stepped into the hallway, the air felt heavier, charged. The corridor smelled of disinfectant and old stone, the scent of systems that had existed long before conscience became optional. We walked in silence, past holding cells, past people staring through bars, eyes full of questions no one ever answered. The elevator ride was slow, painfully slow. You must have really upset her, the guard said at last, not looking at me. Or finally made her curious, I replied. He glanced at me then. Something unreadable crossed his face. I've worked here 20 years, he said quietly. I've seen a lot of things that didn't sit right. Just never thought I'd see today. The doors opened on the top floor. Carpet replaced concrete. The lighting softened. Authority lived here. We stopped in front of a heavy wooden door with a brass nameplate polished to a mirror shine. The guard knocked. Come in, came the voice. He opened the door but stayed outside. She's here, Your Honor. That will be all, the judge said. The door closed behind me. For the first time in over a decade, I stood alone in a room with my daughter. She was still wearing her robe, still sitting behind the desk like a shield. But her face was no longer cold. It was pale. You, she said. Sit. I'll stand, I replied. She studied me then, really studied me. Not the hunched posture, not the cheap coat, but the eyes. Recognition dawned slowly, like a nightmare surfacing from sleep. No, she whispered. That's not possible. Hello, I said calmly. It's been a long time. Her chair scraped backward as she stood. Why are you here? That's what I wanted to ask you, I answered. Why are innocent people rotting in cells beneath your courtroom? Her voice shook with anger or fear. You humiliated me. You disrupted my court. You jailed a witness without hearing her, I said. You didn't even look at me. She turned away, pacing. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Oh, I said softly. I think I do. She stopped, slowly turned back. What do you want? She asked. I met her eyes. The truth. And I think you know exactly why I had to come disguised as someone you'd dismiss. Silence pressed between us. Then footsteps echoed in the hallway, many of them. Purposeful, coordinated. My daughter heard them too. What did you do? She whispered. I didn't answer, because the door was already opening. And when the agents stepped inside with badges raised, my daughter finally understood. This meeting was never about me begging for mercy. The room filled fast. Men and women in dark jackets stepped inside with quiet precision, badges flashing just long enough to erase any doubt about who they were. The air shifted from authority to inevitability. My daughter froze. This is highly inappropriate, she said, voice sharp but brittle. You cannot enter a judge's chambers without... A woman at the front spoke calmly. We can and we have. She placed a folder on the desk, thick, organized, final. My daughter looked at me, disbelief cracking through her composure. What did you do? I told the truth, I said. Same thing that got me locked up downstairs. Her eyes darted to the folder. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. This is a mistake, she said, more to herself than anyone else. You don't understand how complicated redevelopment cases are. These were legal proceedings. The agent didn't argue. She simply slid out a single photograph. A property deed, then another, bank transfers, timelines. names repeated too often to be coincidence. You approved seizures without hearings, the agent said evenly. You denied bail where it was legally required. You signed orders that forced people out of their homes while developers moved in within days. My daughter's hands curled into fists. They were guilty, she snapped. They broke ordinances. They failed to comply. Some missed court because they were burying parents, I said quietly. Some paid their taxes, I added. Some never committed a crime at all. She turned on me then. You don't get to judge me. I stepped forward. I do, because I raised you to believe the law exists to protect the powerless, not erase them. Her voice dropped. You always thought you were better than me. No, I said. I thought you were better than this. Silence. The agent spoke again. We've been listening for months. Phone calls, emails, meetings. This wasn't one bad call, it was a system. My daughter sank into her chair. They needed the land, she whispered. I thought if I moved things along, the neighborhood would improve. Jobs, housing. And the people who lived there? I asked. She didn't answer. The agent nodded to two others. It's time. Cuffs clicked softly, an ordinary sound for something so extraordinary. As they read her rights, my daughter looked at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Did you plan this? She asked. I planned to see the truth, I said. What happened after was your doing. They led her toward the door. She stopped once just before crossing the threshold. What about the people downstairs? She asked quietly. They're being released, the agent said. Every case you touched is under review. My daughter swallowed hard. The door closed behind her. And for the first time since I walked into that courtroom, I felt the full weight of what justice actually costs. But the arrests weren't the end. They were just the beginning, because undoing the damage she caused would prove far harder than exposing it. The courthouse didn't celebrate after the arrest. There were no cheers, no sense of victory, just confusion, whispers, and an unspoken fear spreading through the halls. Clerks avoided eye contact. Attorneys suddenly remembered meetings they needed to attend elsewhere. Everyone understood the same thing at once. If a judge could fall, no case was safe. I was escorted back downstairs, but this time the door didn't close behind me. It opened. Lena was still sitting on the bench, knees drawn to her chest. When she saw me step out of the corridor instead of into the cell, she stood abruptly. What happened? She asked. I took a breath. You're going home. She stared at me, uncomprehending. Home like today? Yes, I said. Today, the guard unlocked the cell. Marisol let out a sharp laugh, then covered her mouth as if afraid hope itself might get her punished. Within minutes, phones started ringing across the building. Orders were reversed. Paperwork was rushed. Judges from neighboring counties were contacted to review emergency releases. Every case tied to my daughter's signature was now radioactive. Lena clutched her folder as if it might vanish. Does this mean my house? It means your case will be heard by someone who has to look you in the eyes, I said. And that's where justice actually begins. Upstairs, conference rooms filled with federal investigators. Downstairs, families reunited in stunned silence. Some cried. Some laughed. Some didn't react at all, like their bodies hadn't yet caught up with the idea of freedom. I stood near the exit when Lena came back to me, paperwork in hand. I don't even know your name, she said. I hesitated, then told her. Her eyes widened. You're really... I'm just someone who should have acted sooner, I said. Outside, news vans lined the street. Cameras were already rolling. A reporter shouted my name, but I kept walking. This wasn't my story to tell. Not yet. What mattered was what came next. Because exposing corruption doesn't rebuild homes. It doesn't restore lost years. It doesn't erase the trauma of being locked in a cell while your life collapses outside. That takes time, money, and something rarer, accountability. That evening, I sat in a borrowed office with stacks of files spread across the desk. Each one represented a family, a house, a future interrupted, 46 more cases like Lena's. And each one raised the same question. How do you repair damage done by someone who wore the robe of justice? My phone buzzed. A message from the lead investigator. Assets frozen. Development accounts seized. Next step, restitution plan. I leaned back, exhausted. The truth had come out, but truth alone doesn't heal. It only opens the door to the harder work. the kind that doesn't make headlines. And while the world focused on my daughter's arrest, I was preparing for something far more difficult, facing the families whose lives she had already destroyed. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw folders, manila, overstuffed, labeled with addresses instead of names. Homes reduced to case numbers. Lives summarized in paragraphs written by people who never had to live inside the consequences. By morning, I was ready. The meeting was held in a community center a few blocks from the courthouse. Folding chairs, bad coffee, a room that smelled faintly of dust and determination. Word had spread quickly. People came early, unsure if this was another promise that would dissolve the moment they believed in it. I stood at the front, no robe, no title, just me. They didn't clap. They didn't glare either. They waited. An older man spoke first. "My parents bought our house in 1969, he said. "I was born in that living room. 3 months ago, I was told it belonged to someone else." A woman followed. "I lost my job while I was in jail. My kids went to my sister. I still wake up thinking I hear the cell door." Another voice. "They said it was legal." Each sentence landed like a weight. I listened. That was the first rule. No defending, no explaining. No reminding them that I'd helped expose it. Listening was the least I owed them. When the room finally went quiet, I spoke. "I can't undo what happened," I said. "I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. But the money taken through fraud is being recovered. Homes that still stand can be returned. Others will be compensated. And no decision will be made without your voices." Skepticism moved through the room like a current. A woman in the front row crossed her arms. "Why should we trust you?" I nodded. "You shouldn't, not automatically. Trust is earned. And if at any point you believe this process isn't fair, you walk away and tell everyone why." That surprised them. Hope always does. Over the next hours, plans took shape, not from me, but from them. A community board, legal aid funded by seized assets, oversight written into every step so no one like my daughter could ever do this here again. I watched something fragile form, not forgiveness, ownership. When the meeting ended, people lingered, talked, exchanged numbers. A neighborhood that had been deliberately fractured was slowly remembering how to exist. As I packed up, someone touched my arm. It was the older man from earlier. "You could have stayed quiet," he said. "You didn't." "I should have seen it sooner," I replied. He shook his head. "Maybe, but you saw it in time for us." Outside, the sun was setting. The detention facility was quieter than I expected. No shouting, no drama, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the slow shuffle of procedures that stripped people down to their most basic identities. Visitor, inmate, guard. I handed over my identification and followed the officer down a narrow corridor. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know who I would find on the other side of the glass. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. No robe, no authority, just an orange uniform and tired eyes that had lost their sharp edge. She sat down slowly, picked up the phone, and waited for me to do the same. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I didn't think I would either," I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was different now, no longer angry, just painfully honest. "They told me everything is frozen," she said. "Accounts, property, even things I didn't realize were connected." "Yes," I said, "and the people you hurt are starting to rebuild." She closed her eyes. "Good." I studied her face, searching for excuses, defensiveness, anything that would make this easier. I found none. "I convinced myself it wasn't personal," she said quietly. "That they were just cases, files. If I didn't think about their faces, it didn't feel real." "And when did it start to feel real?" I asked. "When I was led past the holding cells," she whispered. "When I heard someone crying and realized I used to ignore that sound." She looked up at me then, eyes wet but steady. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I don't even think I deserve it, but I need you to know I understand now." I believed her. That didn't change anything. "You'll face consequences," I said. "Real ones, prison time. Public accountability, loss of everything you built." "I know," she said, "and I accept it." The guard signaled that time was almost up. She hesitated. "Will you come back?" I took a breath. "I don't know," I said honestly. I came today because you asked, because you're my daughter, but I can't promise more than that. She nodded, swallowing hard. That's fair. As I stood to leave, she pressed her hand against the glass. After a moment, I mirrored the gesture. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just acknowledgement. When I walked out into the afternoon light, my phone buzzed again. A message from the community board, plans approved. First home return scheduled within weeks. 2 worlds pulling in opposite directions. One rebuilding, one paying for what it destroyed. And I stood exactly in the middle. I thought the hardest choice was exposing my daughter. I was wrong. The hardest choice was deciding what came after justice was served. 1 year later, the street looked different. Fresh paint covered what had once been boarded windows. New mailboxes stood where eviction notices had been taped. On porches rebuilt plank by plank, people sat again, talking, laughing, arguing about ordinary things. The kind of ordinary that only feels precious after it's been stolen. I walked slowly, letting the sounds settle into me. A man waved from across the street. He was carrying groceries into a house that had once been scheduled for demolition. A woman knelt beside a child planting flowers where police tape had once fluttered. These weren't miracles. They were repairs, earned through time, money, and the stubborn refusal to let harm have the final word. The community board met monthly now, not to ask permission, but to make decisions. Legal aid operated out of a converted storefront. People came in afraid and left informed, which is sometimes the difference between losing everything and keeping enough to start again. I never led those meetings. That mattered. Justice isn't about replacing one authority with another. It's about returning power to the people who were denied it in the first place. My daughter's case no longer led the news. Another scandal had taken its place, as scandals always do. She was serving her sentence quietly, working in the prison library, helping people navigate appeals she once would have dismissed without reading. She still wrote to me. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't a decision you make once. It's a question that keeps returning, changing shape as time passes. Some days the answer was closer to yes. Other days it wasn't, and that was okay. One afternoon, I sat on a bench outside the courthouse, the same building where everything had unraveled. People passed without recognizing me. I liked it that way. A young woman stopped nearby, phone in hand, arguing with someone about rent. Life continuing. Messy, unresolved. That's the thing about justice. It doesn't wrap itself neatly with closure and applause. It leaves loose ends. It leaves scars. It leaves people changed in ways they didn't ask for. But it also leaves choices. I chose not to protect my daughter from the consequences of her actions. That choice cost me the version of family I thought I'd have in old age. But it gave dozens of families back something more important: their homes, their dignity, their future. If there's one truth I carry forward, it's this: love without accountability isn't love. And justice without humanity isn't justice. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel noble. It feels lonely. It feels like loss. But if it restores what was taken from others, then it's worth that cost. I stood, adjusted my coat, and walked on. The story didn't end with forgiveness or punishment. It ended with responsibility. And that, finally, was enough. Because the hardest stories aren't about villains or heroes. They're about what we choose to do when the truth costs us everything we thought we were protecting.